Support for the Capital Connection comes from
United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President, uupinfo.org. And New York State United Teachers, representing professionals in education and healthcare, online at nysut.org.
It's the Capital Connection. Hi, I'm Alan Chartock. Joining us this week is Georgana Hanson, the interim president and chief executive officer of Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts, where she was formerly the vice president of public policy and regulatory affairs. PPESAE is the nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that represents the Planned Parenthood affiliates in New York. In her role, Georgana leads the organization's legislative efforts to protect and advance the reproductive and sexual health and rights of all New Yorkers. Georgana Hansen, welcome to the Capital Connection.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you.
Let's start with the Supreme Court decision striking down Roe v. Wade. What's your analysis of the decision, and what does this mean in New York State?
Yeah, loss of our constitutional right to abortion is dangerous and unconscionable. It's going to rob millions of the power to control their own bodies. And we're not going to stop fighting until everyone has the ability to determine their reproductive future. It's really important to underscore abortion remains legal here in New York. We were one of the first states to legalize abortion prior to Roe. And in 2019, we took the important steps to modernize our law and align it with the central holdings of Roe, with the passage of the Reproductive Health Act. But even with Roe, abortion was a right in name only for really far too many. And we are not going to stop fighting until we restore the right to abortion for everyone and we build an infrastructure for access to care that's rooted in equality.
Well, New York is New York. What about the rest of the country?
Well, I think that's what we're starting to see right now. This creates a chaotic and dynamic situation where abortion access is rapidly diminishing across the country. We knew going into this moment that 26 states were likely to ban or severely restrict abortion, and that number included 13 states with trigger laws that could quickly go into effect. Holistically, that's at least half of the country where people would no longer have power over their own bodies and their own lives. And so what we're seeing now is 9 states have abortion bans in effect, and it's a highly fluid situation, and advocates and providers are relentlessly fighting back. We know that recently out in Ohio, the ACLU and Planned Parenthood Federation of America filed a lawsuit in the Ohio Supreme Court seeking to block the state's 6-week ban. We know there's, suits filed in other courts, but this is going back to the states. It's a rapidly dynamic and evolving moment. And what's happening is in many places where access was already severely curtailed, we're now seeing no access at all. And that has a disproportionate impact on Black, Latino, Indigenous, people of color, people living in rural communities, young people, and it's devastating.
So let me ask you this. What's the difference between politically what's going on in New York State, which seems to be somewhat progressive here, and the rest of the country, or in many of the other states of the rest of the country?
Well, I think nationally we've seen a concerted effort for decades by hostile politicians to roll back people's ability to make decisions and control their own bodies. And it's not going to end there. We know that at the national level, their ultimate goal is a federal ban that would impact everyone. And I think the other thing, again, to underscore is that the right to abortion is critical, but it is meaningless without access. And that is what we have seen for decades, where states have rolled back access to care, eviscerating individuals' ability to control their own bodies. And so while we do have very protective laws on our books through the Reproductive Health Act, there is more we can and should do here in New York. We need to pass a broad and inclusive equality amendment to enshrine these rights into our Constitution, including prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sex, pregnancy, and pregnancy outcomes. And we need to really invest in access, invest in the providers who on the ground are making the right to abortion a reality, and invest in the organizations that are supporting individuals who are facing barriers here in New York, getting the care that they need.
I still don't get it. I still don't understand because, I'm with you. I think you're right. But there are an awful lot of states and there are an awful lot of women who could be doing more. And I just don't get it.
We have broad support for access to abortion in this country. 8 in 10 people believe that abortion should be legal here in the United States. I think that is what's so one of the things that is so unsettling and disturbing about the action that the court took. It is totally out of alignment where the majority of New Yorkers are and the majority of Americans are. And we're seeing that play out across the country. And so we are all fighting back, but you have seen decades of a minority but organized and well-funded group of individuals who have been steadfast in their effort to roll back their rights, and we are going to be steadfast and relentless in our effort to tirelessly pursue securing them back.
Well, Georgiana Hansen, how do you fight back? What specific tools do you have to fight back with?
So there are a couple of different ways that we can fight back. One, we can make sure here in New York we're doing everything we can to strengthen our laws and expand access to care. I will say that I know Planned Parenthood health centers across the state have been preparing for this moment and are deeply rooted in how they can increase access to care for all who need it. The other thing I just want to highlight that I think is so critical to understand is this is going to have such a disproportionate impact on Black, Latino, Indigenous, and other people of color because of this country's legacy of racism and discrimination. And so people who do not have access to the resources and supports they need to travel out of state may be forced to carry pregnancies against their will or seek abortion outside of the healthcare system. This is going to further exacerbate unacceptable disparities we see in our country. In our country right now, Black women are 3 times more likely to die because of pregnancy and childbirth, and this is really, frankly, unconscionable. And that anyone would be forced to carry a pregnancy to term because they've been stripped of this right to make their own personal health decisions I can't believe we are living in this space. And so we need to be having conversations in our communities about the impact that this is going to have on the lives of pregnant people, on their families, on our communities. And we need to be making sure folks are registered to vote and are showing up in support of where they stand on this issue, because this is about, at its core, our right to make our own personal health care decisions that's being stripped away by people who don't have a right to take that away from us.
Georgiana Hansen, the question I have for you is, how do you deal with other states other than New York in terms of building a broad coalition?
I think that building by activists or advocacy organizations has been very much part of the reproductive freedom movement. We have Planned Parenthood obviously has affiliates and activists across the country who are engaged in this work. And I think holistically there has been an effort to grow and expand and ensure that the voices of the movement are reflective of the people who these laws impact the most. And we know this is an intersectional movement. The right to abortion is deeply connected to issues around, being able to participate in elections and vote. It's deeply connected to issues around women's ability to participate freely and fully in the workforce and be paid a living and fair wage. These are all interconnected issues, and we will see that, and I think those voices are really coming together in this critical moment to push forward why we need to hold these politicians accountable for rolling back our rights and restore our right to abortion for everyone here in this country. And we have been preparing for a long time. We have seen the writing on the wall that this is possible, and we are going to see over the summer, over the fall, this is a marathon, not a sprint. People actively engaged and raising their voices out of outrage and concern for what has happened here.
Tell me a little bit, Georgiana Hansen, about Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts. You've been vice president, now you're acting president. What is it? What is it all about?
Sure. Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts is a statewide advocacy legislative support arm for the 5 Planned Parenthoods here in New York State. Our New York Planned Parenthood serve over 200,000 patients every year. A range of services from contraception, STI testing and treatment, birth, and abortion care, gender-affirming care, and we our whole role here is to work to build and ensure we have a state where everyone can access the comprehensive reproductive and sexual health care services that they need with dignity, and that's our role in working with the legislature and the agencies to fulfill that mission.
So, Georgiana Hansen, I guess here's the question I want to ask you. You talked about gender-affirming care. What does that mean?
Gender-affirming care is a range of services that affiliates provide to support individuals who are looking to align, with the gender identity that they find for themselves. And so, again, our services are comprehensive. They're full spectrum reproductive and sexual health care services. We are building those services based on the needs of patients in our communities. And our mission here at PPASA is to really look to both protect and expand access to comprehensive reproductive and sexual health care services and policies that protect the rights to bodily autonomy.
Let's go with the Supreme Court decision striking down Roe v. Wade. What's your analysis of the decision, and what does this mean in New York State specifically?
Well, I think that's, we know we've done an important work here in New York to protect the right to abortion. New York was one of the first states to legalize access to abortion prior to Roe v. Wade. And the Reproductive Health Act that was passed in 2019 was really important to aligning that protection with the central holdings of Roe. So we have done important work to protect the right. We need to do more. We need to put that right into our state constitution. And as I said before, a right is meaningless when we don't have access. And so we have to make sure that we are meeting the moment, not just in protecting the rights, but in also building out an infrastructure that is rooted in equity, where anyone who needs care can access it, regardless of who they are, where they live, or how much money they make.
Now, we know that there are certain religious groups which do not agree with your position on this. Do you have a tactic? Do you negotiate? Do you talk to them? Or do you just ignore them?
Our work is rooted in our value that everyone deserves access to comprehensive reproductive and sexual health care services. And so that is what drives us and moves us to ensuring that we live in a state and in a country where everyone can get the care they need. That is where our focus is. And I think it's important to know that abortion is a widely shared experience. 1 in 4 women will access abortion care by the age of 45. Many of them are already parents. They're struggling to make ends meet, and they're people of all faiths. People of all faiths come to the space of supporting access to comprehensive reproductive sexual health care services. And so our work is focused and driven with that, in that value framework and by the needs of patients that come to Planned Parenthood.
Georgiana Hansen serves as the interim president and chief executive officer of Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts, where she was formerly the vice president. Okay, so let's talk about the Equality Amendment. What's that?
So the Equality Amendment would be a broad and inclusive way of protecting people from discrimination in our Constitution. Right now, there are classes of individuals who are not reflected in our state constitution, and this fills that important gap by ensuring that it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, sex discrimination, including pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. And that language is really important. Pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes is to really anchor the reality that we have seen a growth in criminalization of pregnant people for their pregnancy outcomes, whether that's miscarriage or stillbirth, and abortion is a pregnancy outcome as well. And so this is really important in making sure our Constitution is a foundational document, and it should be reflective and protective of us all. And right now it isn't. And for it to be, we need to expand to it protects against discrimination, and that's what the Equality Amendment would do. The Equality Amendment also would ensure we can get at the ways in which, discrimination is systemic, and to really give a tool for addressing that. We know that this is highly supported by voters, and they're energized by an Equality Amendment. 79% of voters say they're inclined to vote yes on a ballot measure that expands equality protections in our state constitution. And so we believe this is a way New York can meet the moment that we are facing when our rights are under attack. I think if we look at this Supreme Court decision and think that it only relates to abortion, we are sorely mistaken. I think there are a host of other rights that we hold dear that are at risk, and we need to ensure that we're strengthening our state constitution to truly reflect and protect us all.
Well, Georgiana Hansen, I guess I want to ask you this then. You also support medical aid in dying. Based on what you've just said to us, what are the chances this makes it into law in New York?
I know this is a discussion that has been happening in New York for some time. I think this comes from a place of bodily autonomy and individuals making those very personal decisions for themselves. And that is where our support for that issue comes from.
Well, what does it mean? In other words, are you asking for people to have permission to commit suicide? I mean, what exactly are you after here?
I would say, we have support. There is broad support for that bill amongst advocates. This is an issue around personal decision-making. We're seeing individual rights rolled back in bodily autonomy, specifically around abortion, and that is concerning, and where our support has driven for medical aid in dying is around the issue of bodily autonomy.
Well, following up on that, I know that you're creating an abortion access fund. Is that a fundraising problem that we have for those of us who believe in this?
I believe you're referencing the Reproductive Freedom and Equity Fund?
Yes.
Or program?
Yes.
So the Reproductive Equity and Freedom Program is designed to think about how we holistically invest in abortion access. So again, I think we need to underscore that the right to abortion is meaningless if one cannot access it. And we know today people already experience barriers, even here in New York, accessing the care they need. And that includes issues around transportation, costs of childcare and time off from work, inability to afford the health care service. And so what the Reproductive Freedom and Equity Fund looks at, how would we as a state holistically invest in abortion access, how we would invest in the provider network to increase capacity and meet the need, how we would support this broad ecosystem of providers who we've not seen a strategic long-term investment in abortion access for these providers. And we know cost, delivery, and care are increasing, and providers were already struggling to meet the need that was on the ground. So investing in provider capacity, addressing the fact that there is uncompensated care, that people may not have coverage. We've taken important steps to strengthen coverage of abortion here in New York. Even in the budget this year, we codified requirements, and New York insurers cover abortion services. We are one of 17 states that cover abortion services in our Medicaid program, which is critically important from an equity perspective. But there are still going to be people who lack coverage, and we need to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind and that everyone can get the care they need. Then there are these organizations that whose sole purpose is to support patients getting to the care that they need, and these are abortion funds. And they are the ones, along with providers, who make the right to care a reality. And we should be ensuring that they have some supports that they need to meet the need that's present today and what might be coming.
Now, how does somebody who is listening to this program, who believes in what you're saying, get involved?
Sure. I think that there are so many ways that people can get involved today. They can give to abortion funds and providers, especially abortionfunds.org, to be able to support people who are facing incredible barriers getting the care they need. I think we need to do a lot of work to destigmatize abortion. Abortion is healthcare. It's, like I said, it's a widely shared experience across many individuals. And I think that we need to be talking about how devastating this ruling is, the impact it is going to have, especially on communities of color, and how we need to be working together to fight back, to be voting, to be raising our voices with our elected officials and demanding bold action in this moment.
What are you finding from the legislature itself when the folks go up there and you talk to them? Are they being receptive, or do you find that there's a little bit of hesitancy?
I think that we have seen our lawmakers come out strongly in support of access to reproductive and sexual health care services. We saw actions in the budget, and we saw a historic investment of $35 million into provider capacity and security for providers in this moment by Governor Hochul, the legislature at the end of session passing a range of bills. As we think about how dynamic this moment is, how are we going to try to be protective of ways in which other states may try to chill delivery of care here in New York. And so I think that there is, we're fortunate to be in a state where we do have a great deal of support, and I think it is going to be incumbent that we know this is a marathon, not a sprint. It is a very dynamic and evolving nature, and we're going to be continuing to relentlessly pursue bold and innovative policies and investments to meet this moment and do everything in our power to expand access to abortion.
So that raises an interesting question as I see it. One of the things that I think your organization is trying to do is ensure comprehensive sexuality education for all New York youth. There certainly will be some pushback on that. How do you handle it?
It comes from a values place. We believe all people, and especially young people, need to have the information and education to make healthy decisions.
So, for example, what? Give me an example of something that would come under sexual education that you would like to see people children in the schools learning.
Yeah, we're talking about medically accurate, age-appropriate sex education. In our younger years, it's talking about healthy relationships. We need kids to understand boundaries and how to wash our hands, how to take care of our bodies. And as they grow older and it becomes more developmentally appropriate, safe relationships, how we can prevent violence and sexual abuse, dating violence later in their lives, and how they can protect their bodies. And that's what, again, it is age-appropriate, medically accurate, but it's conversations we're intentionally having with young people to put them in the best possible position to make good and healthy decisions for themselves as they grow older.
So then the question becomes a larger one, which is the impact of limited service pregnancy centers. Are we going to have more of them?
I think what is concerning is that we need to understand what gaps we have in access to pregnancy-related care for New Yorkers across this state. And we want to ensure that every individual has access to comprehensive information about their options and the resources they need to make the path and decision that's best for them. And so I think we know there is legislation passed that will look and study about these resource gaps and what resources are currently available and not available in communities, so that we can ensure that we are building up an infrastructure that is able to support pregnant people in making the decision that's right for them.
We're out of time. Our guest has been Georgiana Hansen, Interim President and Chief Executive Officer of Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts. Georgiana, again, thanks so much for joining us with your so important message. I really appreciate the effort.
Thank you, Alan.
Support for the Capital Connection comes from
United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President, uupinfo.org. And New York State United Teachers, representing professionals in education and healthcare, online at nysut.org.